We are living through what feels like a historic time in our field and in our world. And so the decisions we make now, the conversations we have, the relationships we build are shaping what our world will look like going forward. And of course, that's always true, but I just feel that very, very vibrantly right now.
That was just one of today's guests, Dr. Emma Tsui. Hello and welcome everybody to Making Public Health Personal. This podcast is brought to you by the CUNY Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy in New York City. I'm your host, Laura Meoli-Ferrigon. Thanks for listening. Today's episode looks at an oral history project at CUNY SPH called Public Health Education Now. This project asks students, faculty, and staff at CUNY SPH how our lived experiences since 2020 have shaped our vision of what we want public health education to be. We'll discuss the oral history interviews that the team conducted, focusing on experiences of not only the COVID-19 pandemic, but also the increased visibility of racism and other oppressions, and movements for racial justice that are reverberating both in and out of the classroom. Speaking with us today about this project are three members of the Public Health Education Now team, who I'll introduce you to. This project was co-led by two CUNY SPH associate professors from our Department of Community Health and Social Sciences, Emma Tsui and Spring Cooper. Dr. Emma Tsui's work focuses on intersections of community health, occupational health, and social sciences. Her research methods include some innovative methods such as peer interviewing, digital storytelling, and oral history, which is the format used for this particular project. Dr. Spring Cooper is a social researcher with experience in public health, health promotion, and sexuality. Her academic background focuses on biobehavioral health and prevention, as well as sexual health education and knowledge among young people. Our third team member, Ayah Elsayed, helped to design this project. She conducted interviews and worked to build and maintain the audio archive. She graduated in 2022 from CUNY SPH with her master's in public health and now teaches public health at Pace University. Ayah, Spring, and Emma, thank you guys for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having us. This is such a great opportunity to get to talk about the project with you and with each other.
Well, thank you, Emma. I'm trying to say your name so that people can hear the differences in your voice. Let's start with Emma. Tell us about Public Health Education Now, a participatory oral history project based at CUNY SPH.
So to tell this story, I feel like I have to go back a little bit to the spring of 2020 when, like many of us, I was teaching during the early months of the pandemic, had been teaching in person, moved to a synchronous online format, and was really just sort of feeling the anguish and overwhelm of teaching and learning public health as we had known it while we were all living through this emergent public health and political crisis. And I think those feelings really only magnified over the summer of 2020 with George Floyd's murder and the associated uprisings. But even as we were experiencing that, I started to have conversations with Spring and others, and there was a feeling of potential there too, like we could change what we had been doing to meet this moment. So then in the fall, I became active in the school's anti-racist teaching collaborative, which Spring instigated and which has made such a huge difference in my life during this time. And just as a little background, in that group, faculty and doctoral students learn together about anti-oppression and liberation in the classroom. And we've been practicing shifting our teaching toward that. We're essentially trying to make our classrooms more equitable and relational and supportive. And I really loved that we talk about pedagogy there. That was one of the first times that I had really, in my experience of close to 2 decades in higher education, really talked about pedagogy with other people. And so really it was those inspiring sessions and conversations that led to the idea to create a participatory oral history project that would look at what was happening in our lives and in the classroom during this time. So the goal of the project, which I think you touched on already, is to capture from the perspective of students and faculty and staff, first, what the experience has been of teaching and learning public health during this historic time in our field, and what we have learned from that about how public health education might evolve to take on board the lessons of this time. it's really exciting to be doing this work at CUNY SPH because we are a public school of public health that really cares about aspiring toward equity, community engagement and participation, and most of all, because of the diversity and vibrancy of our student body.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the fact that people are working in the field while applying the lessons that they're learning in the classroom.
Definitely. Being a graduate school, we have a lot of working professionals in our student body. So very important. So Ayah, I'll come to you next. You helped to design the project. You engaged in co-learning, conducted interviews, and helped to build and maintain the audio archive. What was it like for you participating in this project?
It's honestly been really great. I felt really drawn to it once I saw the description about a year ago because I had a really big interest in education. And then also, I related a lot to the project myself because I had also experienced being a student during that time. So I immediately knew that I wanted to join onto that project and just learn more about what other people's experiences were like during that time, so that eventually I could apply them to my own classroom. And at that point, I didn't even know that I was going to be like a professor in a classroom. At the time, I was just a teaching assistant. So I thought like I can kind of like combine everything and like really benefit from it. And Emma and Spring really gave me and the rest of the students like space to like give our own perspective onto like what some of the questions should look like or what the research process should look like. So that's been really great. And then when it came to the interviews themselves, that was really enjoyable for me to like talk to other students because that's something that I had really missed out on in my own experience at the school. I didn't really get to like connect with a lot of students. So this was kind of a way of me doing that. And I felt like a lot of the people that I interviewed also felt that way, that they had like enjoyed like spending time with another student talking about like what their experience had been like. I just felt like really validated in my own experiences as well, because a lot of the things that I had felt, some of the other students had also felt. And then I felt like I also really learned a lot about like some of the other things that I didn't necessarily go through, but a lot of other students did.
That sounds like a great experience. Is there anything you wanted to add, Spring?
I think what we heard Ayah just saying there is really important to touch because she was talking about how she had been isolated, as we all were, through this time, and that then she was able to like find some connection through this project. And that's really mirroring some of the findings actually that came out of this project, that we are all public health professionals experiencing this, and we're then trying to talk about what's happening out in the world, but we are also part of this. We are also experiencing these effects ourselves, and we are needing to care for ourselves. And that's really like the gist of this whole project, is how do we create better spaces for learning? How are we improving this? How are we taking this time to actually say, how can we do this better? And I love that that just like naturally comes up over and over as we're talking about this project.
Yeah, and I'm sure the students also felt probably more comfortable, not that they are uncomfortable answering questions from a professor, but to have Ayah there as a current student as well at the time to just be open and speak to. I'm sure you probably got some really heartfelt and honest interviews.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that it was really easy talking to the students. It just felt like we were just like hanging out and talking about like what life has been like for like the past 2 years. And I think what also really helped out was like we would have pre-interviews before the actual interview, and I would just get to like talk to them. And sometimes, I mean, I would just like talk to them about like how they were doing or just like random things. So I felt like that really, really helped a lot. And we had like a really great relationship before we started the interview. Because I knew that during the interview, I wasn't gonna like talk a lot. I just kind of like gave them the majority of the talking time. So any kind of like conversations I would have before the interview and then after as well to like check in and see how they were doing.
That's great. So Ayah, what was the most surprising thing that you learned from those interviews?
A lot of things weren't that surprising to me because I felt very similar about a lot of the things. But I think one of the things that kind of surprised me was kind of hearing about their own experiences in working during that time, because a lot of people had like unique working experiences, some positive, some negative. So that was the one thing that I wasn't like really like expecting that much, because a lot of the students work, and a lot of their jobs are like health related. So it was really interesting to hear how like that played a role in their education or just in general how it was like during the pandemic and racial justice uprisings.
Spring, what was the most surprising thing you learned from these interviews?
I really think that everyone thinks like me. And I'm always surprised when people don't. And so, as you heard, we had students interviewing other students for the most part, and then faculty members interviewing faculty and staff for the most part in this project. So we did some interviews with other faculty members, and sometimes people didn't come from the frame of reference that Emma and I were kind of coming to this project, and that was challenging, I think, to remain in this like neutral and open place to hear their stories when sometimes their ideas didn't necessarily align with how we hoped people might be thinking about this time, actually. And so I guess that was kind of surprising and kind of challenging for me, but also we wanted a range of voices. We wanted to hear, all the different experiences, and then also hear how some people, didn't think they needed to shift their teaching or what they were doing. And that's all part of this, is getting this like really full, complete story of everyone's experiences and attitudes and documenting that.
Definitely. And Emma, same question for you. What was the most surprising thing you learned from these interviews, or maybe lessons you learned from it?
One of the most immediate lessons that I learned from reading through and doing the interviews had to do with the diversity of our student body, which is something that we take for granted. And I think that I had always walked into the classroom with, and I'm embarrassed a bit to admit this now, but with an idea, a sort of sense of celebrating the diversity of that classroom, but being sort of race blind to it as well. And I think there's a long section of each interview where people talk about their background and their identities and their upbringing and their families and what's important to them. And in hearing those stories, I feel like I got to understand the nuances of what the student experience is and what students are bringing into the classroom and the richness of that. And it gave me such an appreciation for what they bring beyond their professional experience, and has made me want to make use of that in the classroom more and give people more space to be heard in that way.
Mm-hmm. And Spring, what lesson have you learned from this project so far?
The lessons in this project are so big, which is really exciting, because the lessons are what we can take to public health education in the future, and how we can change it, and how we can shift it, and how we can keep it evolving, and how we can focus the attention back in on ourselves, back in on the people who are part of this, how we can nurture ourselves, how we can nurture each other, how we can create community for each other. That's something that I feel really strongly about and really want to do. And I think that the community aspect of the classroom and, creating classrooms that are learning communities is something I'm really passionate about. And I think that we heard the importance of that really, really clearly through this project.
And was it more so that the students wanted to be in person, or that you were able to create a community even though everyone was virtual at the time?
Yeah, community, I think it is sometimes helped by being in person, but it's definitely not necessary. We can create strong communities online. We can create strong communities by, facilitating interaction, by building off of all the experiences that people bring, that whether they're formal or informal learnings, and recognizing those, as Emma was talking about. And the more that we recognize those and build on those and use every person's experience, then we are creating a community where we're all learning from each other. And yeah, sometimes that is more difficult, especially if, some people aren't as comfortable facilitating online interactions, or some people aren't as comfortable engaging in online online interactions for many different reasons, including, what their home setup might be like, or what their technology is like, or even some people who maybe are gender diverse or feel like they're going to get misgendered more commonly through the Zoom room. Like there's a lot of reasons that people feel less comfortable engaging in these online spaces. And so in person tends to maybe get around some of those issues. We put ourselves all in the same physical space. So we give ourselves a bit of a place where we're all starting from the same space and, quite literally. But I think that the importance is, how are we learning to do this no matter what situation we are in? And that is what we really need to focus some energy in.
Yeah, and I think it's great you both touched on kind of the social aspect of your classes, where you're getting to know your students and therefore letting the students get to know each other. And that's such an important lesson, that everyone can be exposed to different types of people with different backgrounds and be able to open up and share who they are, I think is a really important part of pedagogy. Emma?
I wanted to add to what Spring was saying, that the idea of creating community in the classroom, there's a way in which that's obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we should be doing that. But I think it's not a simple thing to do it. And one of the things that we heard a lot about in the interviews and that we experienced in our own project was the idea that group projects, of which we have many in our teaching at the school, do not automatically generate community. And in fact, those projects can do a lot of harm without appropriate supports in the classroom.
What do you mean harm?
I mean that students will do what students do when they're trying to juggle a lot, which is put their noses to the grindstone and keep moving through the tasks of the work, even as people are not being kind to one another or not able to express what's really going on for them or being marginalized within the group. There are just some really significant issues that can come up. And we heard from students that often they were feeling very isolated in their working lives and in their personal lives during the pandemic, and coming to the school looking for connection and feeling hopeful about group projects, and then just having their hopes absolutely dashed when the focus was so on task and there was no space in which to pause and really connect. And I think it's our job as instructors and staff to create those spaces so that group projects can become rich sources of relationships.
Absolutely. And something I do in my classes is after each project, we have a reflection exercise. And so I think if you don't do that, you're just kind of blindly moving into the next project. And then you don't really learn, like you learn something, but you maybe didn't think about what you learned, if that makes sense.
Or even up front, having time for people to really get to know each other before they are set out to do a task together.
Yeah. Spring, did you want to add to that?
I mean, Emma's touching on something that we haven't yet brought up, that we had some problems in relating in this group early on in the project. Emma and I thought we were doing a lot of community building and within the project. And then we had some big breakdowns, and it was scary for us. It was scary. Emma and I were like, is this project going to continue? What are we going to do?
Breakdowns among the group, the project group.
That were leading the project. Yeah.
Got it.
And we thought, are we going to separate this into like individual little projects and each person takes a piece or something? Like how are we going to manage this? And I remember Emma coming to talk to me about this, and I got really excited. And I was like, Emma, this is it. This is our chance. Like we get to try out all the stuff we've been, talking about. Like, and Emma was like, okay.
Honestly, I was so relieved. I called Spring and was so distressed at the level of distress in the group and some of the harmful things that had been said and had happened. And Spring's reaction, if I'm recalling correctly, was, hooray! And I remember feeling this moment of relief that, like, yes, this is a chance to learn about how to do this better.
Mm-hmm. Very meta.
Yeah. Very.
If you dream of making a difference in the world, a public health degree or certificate can give you the tools to do just that. The City University of New York's Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy equips public health professionals to advance not only a healthier New York City, but a healthier world for us all. We want you to join us in our mission. Visit sph.cuny.edu to learn more about our programs. No matter where you are in your career, CUNY SPH offers a broad range of degree and certificate programs to not only help you advance in your career, but to have a real impact on the world. Public health professionals are needed now more than ever. Join us. Visit sph.cuny.edu to learn more.
So how did you resolve this issue and get the project back on track?
So Spring mentioned that in the early phases, the project had really been dogged by these difficult dynamics within the group. And there came a point where a couple members of the group were feeling like they couldn't continue to work with everyone else. And so at that point, we paused everything we were doing and started talking to wise people in our worlds and within the school to try to figure out what to do. And ultimately, what we decided was to work with two restorative justice facilitators, two amazing humans, to facilitate some restorative circles with our group. And in those circles, we really spent time getting to know one another in a completely different way, getting to know how people were raised and what their family stories are and what their values are. And then moving into really talking about the difficulties and challenges of this time. And so actually the interviews that we did ended up mirroring the process that we went through in those restorative circles. And it was, I would love to hear from Spring and Ayah, but my experience of it was just that I went in feeling so much stress in my body and feeling so concerned for everyone and so demoralized, and came out of it feeling very connected to everyone else, very excited about the project, and just deeply in relationship with one another. And that we had learned something really important about how to work together in public health during a difficult time.
I'll just talk a little bit about like what that process looked like. We had 3 restorative circles facilitated by external facilitators coming in. We did them all in the Zoom room. And what the process looked like is we would have a question to answer and everybody would go around answering it, and it would be passed from one person to the next around the Zoom room, and everybody else would keep their camera on and listen and be a really active listener when someone else was speaking. And then what we were going into was, deeper into our own backgrounds and what shapes us and what creates, how we show up in the world today. What are these things that have, shaped our lives? And hearing these stories from the people in our group and learning about each other in this way created restoration, and it was really beautiful. And restorative circles are used in many different ways. They're used in the justice system, they're used in the classroom, they're used, in any way, and they can be preventative and they can be restorative and they can be facilitating connection. And, there's been a lot of research on these as well, and, how valuable they are. And it was our first experience with them. And we all, I think, came away like, wow, what an amazing tool. Why are we not using this as a tool more often?
Awesome. Ayah, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think especially during the time when we were going to start doing these restorative circles, I was really, really stressed out. And then this added so much more uncertainty about what the project was going to look like after all of this. But I think it was really nice to just connect as a group and talk about things that weren't task related for the project. And I think it also really helped because we got to see how people's identities and experiences and backgrounds had an impact on the degree to which they're connected to the project. Because I think that was kind of one of the sources of the issue was some of us felt a little bit more connected, whereas some of us, we didn't experience the same thing. So we felt a little less connected to the project. So I think that helped with just unifying us a little bit more.
I want to add just one more thing from the paper that the students wrote at the end of this project, there's a phrase that they used in the paper that has stuck with me, which is the power of pause. And the idea that things were not going well, and instead of just pushing ahead and grinding through it, which I think is so often what happens given the urgency of issues in our field, we paused everything so that we could have the time and the space to work together towards restoration. And I think that the culture of public health doesn't really have that built in at this point, but it's something that we should work toward.
So how long did that process take?
That took like a full month. It was not like, oh, let's take a couple of days. That was a month that we took out of our project. And in a school year, a month is a significant amount of time, And so that was the pause. And we wouldn't have made it through the project without that, and so valuable.
And I'm sure you came back to it with a completely different mindset. It's very important to slow down sometimes.
Yeah.
Ayah, you are a professor now, and you at the time were a student. What lessons did you learn, and what have you taken into your classroom from this project?
Yeah, so I would say similarly, I really try to start off the class with something that's not public health related, just something fun, so that the classmates can get to know each other a little bit better. I can get to know them a little better, and just to create a little bit more of a rapport within the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And something else that I've taken from the project is I really try to have them personally connect to public health. So I'll for some of their assignments, I'll ask questions that have to do with their own experiences of public health, or how their identities play into public health in their own lives. That way there's a personal connection there. So I'm making public health personal. It's one of the
Nice.
things that I kind of got from our project.
Mm-hmm.
And also just an acknowledgement. I also try my best to really acknowledge that I know that we talk about a lot of public health issues, and I know that also a lot of us may be experiencing those same issues as well, because that's something that really also came out in the project. And I try to keep the same leniency and understanding that we had earlier in the pandemic, and kind of keep that going, because people still get sick, people still get stressed out, people still have overwhelming things in their lives. So just kind of maintaining that, even if the pandemic is not as serious maybe as it was 2 years ago.
Yeah, and you touched on an interesting point there. Mental health really came into the spotlight during the past few years. A lot of people experience the loss of a loved one, financial burdens, housing insecurity, food insecurity, job loss, and many, many other stressors that make it hard to focus on our education and our careers. Personally, I feel like this has been a positive shift for our community, leading to a better work-life balance. Emma, can you give us a sneak preview of some of the overall responses you found related to mental health?
Yes. As I think we all know, students and faculty, but students especially, experienced a lot during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And in the interviews, we hear a lot about the traumas at many levels that people are living with as a result of this time, and also the learning that has gone with that. We also heard in the interviews a real hunger, I think, from students to be engaging with all of the difficult things that we've experienced in our lives, professionally and otherwise, as public health in the classroom, and feeling that that wasn't really happening to the degree that they wanted. And I think that part of the reason that wasn't happening is because that kind of work, what Ayah was so beautifully describing about making public health personal in the classroom, requires a lot of mental health support. It requires trauma-informed teaching and learning. And we're really lucky at the school to have Sherry Adams and her team. But I think all of us as instructors need more training and support to be able to help students engage with that level of depth in a safe way.
Ayah?
I just wanted to add that I remember hearing in some of the interviews that sometimes it was just overwhelming to constantly hear about COVID. So I've just kind of been keeping that in mind, because it can, especially previously, COVID was such a big thing everywhere, and then it was also in the classrooms, and I think that had a negative impact on people's mental health as well. So it's something that I've noticed in the interview.
I'm sure, especially if you're studying public health, becoming, and into the future going to become, such a huge topic. Once research comes out on the effects of it, it's really a part of the rest of our lives at this point. So yeah, there's a lot of stress there, especially if you have a personal connection or a personal loss that you've suffered as a result of COVID, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Spring, what do you think were the greatest stressors based on the interviews that you conducted, and what has been the takeaway?
Oh, I can't quantify, the diversity of the stressors that people experienced. There were financial stressors, there were emotional stressors, there are physiological stressors, all of these come together to, impact us in so many ways. People all responded to isolation differently. People all responded to the racial uprisings differently, and, had different emotions and feelings come up. All so important to understand, and to see like how the world really impacts us, and, how it impacts our ability to be in the classroom, how it impacts our ability to engage and communicate in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't say, what's the biggest, but like, we had people losing jobs. We had people taking on 2-3 more roles at their jobs. We had people that had family members die. We had people with family members becoming very, very sick, people having to move, people being in isolation, like all of these, really big things that really impact you. And I mean, then there are people that maybe, didn't have any of those things happen that we think like seem so big, but were maybe just so isolated that whole time. And like that in itself, is so horrible. Like there's no way to say what's the biggest, but I think the diversity and the sheer different types of stressors that we experience through this time are immense, and the toll that they take on us as well.
Emma, you had something to add?
I just wanted to add that Spring's description of all of those stressors was making me think of Vivek Murthy's work, and he spoke so extensively about mental health at our graduation this spring. He has a podcast now, and he recently interviewed John Kabat-Zinn, who is both somebody who has talked a lot about the importance of mindfulness for health and public health. And through that conversation, they really talk about the importance of healing ourselves, healing society, healing the planet, and that it really starts with mindfulness. And I think that's just one tool, but it is a tool that we haven't used very much in public health yet, and is something that maybe helps people to feel more steady in their bodies coming into classroom spaces with all of these stressors going on around them.
Yeah, and I think the way I think about this question is mostly related to students, but you guys did interview faculty and staff, and most of them had the same amount of stressors that students did. And I think we forget sometimes that our job doesn't just include how you treat students, but how we treat each other. And was there anything that was surprising for you about the faculty and staff interviews that was different than you expected?
One thing that we had was that teaching collaborative that Emma mentioned, where we created a supportive space for faculty to come and talk about these things. And I think that really supported and nurtured a lot of us. A lot of the people that were interviewed were part of that. And so that was something that we were all really grateful for and could recognize the value that gave us. And so I think that's one thing that, we can see like the value of coming together and, creating a community in times when we really need it.
Absolutely. And how do you all hope that this project will inspire the SPH community, as well as students, faculty, and staff at other public health institutions? Emma?
I really hope that we will change how we think about the classroom, not just as a space of teaching and learning, but as a space that is meant to restore and repair and sustain us in this very difficult work that we are doing and continuing to do. And I have to just quickly share a quote.
Sure.
That a friend shared with me recently. It's from Rachel Naomi Bremen. So she wrote, The places in which we are seen and heard are holy places. They remind us of our value as human beings. They give us the strength to go on. And I really feel like that's where we are in public health education, that these spaces need to help invigorate people.
Definitely. Ayah, how do you hope this project will inspire SPH and other public health institutions?
I'm hoping that public health education generally just becomes very student-centered on like what students' needs are in the classroom and then probably like outside the classroom too. Like we were mentioning before, there was like financial stressors.
Mhm.
So I'd like to see some more like scholarships in public health education or just any kind of like assistance in general that students would need in order to reduce some of those stressors that are outside of the classroom. And then also focusing on like that community building inside the classrooms as well.
Great. And Spring?
Emma said this word healing. And healing is like such a big word, like we think of like traumas that we've been through, physical, mental, emotional, like whatever, these traumas that, stay in our bodies, they stay with us, and like healing through those is big work. And, one of the ways we can really do that is through community, and I think we in public health have started to include mental health in a lot of what we do. There was a big focus on physical first in public health, and then mental has really come in. And now can we shift that to be healing also, not just preventing and stuff, but like this deep healing work that we come together to do in community. And I think that that's the future of the public health classroom in our hopes, is how are we healing together so that we can really make a difference in the world around us.
Definitely. It's like that saying where they say, if you're in a plane crash, take care of yourself first and then go give the mask to someone else. Make sure that everyone's okay. There's a lot of self-work and internal work that has to happen before you even think about starting a community and interacting with others in an important way like that. Emma?
Just adding on to that, as a parent, I feel like I've really learned over the past few years that it's not really possible for people to learn or to be empathic in the way that we would want in a classroom or in a family if someone is really traumatized or dysregulated. And so I think we have to take that on board as part of the experiences that we're all bringing into the classroom these days in order to create really good learning communities.
So I'm really looking forward to hearing the interviews from this oral history project. And since it's not a traditional research paper, I would say as a multimedia producer, I know how time consuming it is to edit and then translate everything into these deliverables of whatever it's going to be. So I'll ask you where you currently are in this project and how do you aim to assemble and disseminate the findings? What will that look like, Emma?
So currently, thus far, we have taken a more traditional approach. We're working on some peer-reviewed articles using thematic and narrative analysis to analyze the interviews. But listening to the interviews, conducting the interviews was such a life-changing experience for me, and I think for many of us, that we really do want to make those available in some way.
Mm-hmm.
But we're still working out exactly how to do that and what those products will look like. And we also made a commitment to people who participated that they would have a lot of control over what was used and how. So it's also our responsibility to do that thinking and then go back to them and say, what are you comfortable with?
Yeah, I mean, you want to tell the story, but you also want to protect people's privacy and just respect how much information they're willing to share in a wide format. But I know from personal experience conducting an interview, the stuff on the cutting room floor is so hard to not share because it teaches you so much. I'm looking forward to reading your summation of everything in whatever form it will be.
I will also say that we are presenting some of this work at the Anti-Racist Teaching Collaborative in a workshop kind of format. So we'll have a chance to work together to really think about how to operationalize some of what we've learned in the classroom as a starting point for applying the lessons at the school. And I'm really excited about that.
And speaking of the Anti-Racist Collaborative, were there any race-based lessons that you apply to your classrooms?
A lot of the things that we've been talking about are anti-racist approach to teaching. So when we talk about recognizing everybody's value and the experience that everybody has, whether it's what we consider formal or informal experience, but that everyone has experience that is relevant, and that all of that we want to value and bring into the classroom. I mean, that's like a basic tenet of anti-racist teaching. So we are, through a lot of the things that we've been talking about throughout this episode today, those are the things that, we are doing to address that in the classroom. So there are these things that are interwoven in to create this anti-racism classroom that is going to be a better space for everybody to be learning in.
Thanks to Emma, Spring, and Ayah for being our guests today. And thank you for listening to Making Public Health Personal, presented by the CUNY Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy in New York City. We would appreciate if you would share, like, and subscribe to our show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, or on our YouTube channel. To find out more about CUNY SPH, you can visit sph.cuny.edu or connect with us on social media. We're on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Just search CUNY SPH. This is your host, Laura Meoli-Ferrigon, signing off. And while public health has a global impact, that doesn't mean we can't make it personal.